want me to do? Draw you a picture?
Yeah. Who is the better leading man, John Wayne or Clint Eastwood? Today we'll compare and contrast the actors' filmographies. John Wayne appeared in 169 feature roles, mostly in movies but also a few television appearances as well. His career as a leading man began in 1930's The Big Trail and ended with 1976's The Shootist. Clint Eastwood's career as a leading man would have begun in 1958's Lafayette Escadrille and is still going on, with his last role being 2021's Cry Macho. He has appeared in over 60 films, which is pale compared to the number Wayne appeared in. Their careers overlapped between 1958 and 1976. Today, we'll discuss the films both released in their same years. Let's start with 1958. The aforementioned Lafayette Escadrille, or Hell Bent for Glory, is one of two films Eastwood appeared in during 1958. The story concerns Thad Walker, played by Tab Hunter, a spoiled, rich kid from Boston who had gotten in serious trouble with the law, who fled to France to join the French Foreign Legion in World War I. In casting, director William A. Wellman wanted Paul Newman and Clint Eastwood as the leads. Studio head Jack L. Warner refused, and substituted teen idol Tab Hunter and David Jansen, with Eastwood moved to a minor role. This was a troubled production, with the director constantly clashing with studio heads. The Lafayette Escadrille was also totally disowned by those still alive who had flown as part of the real Lafayette Escadrille and the Lafayette Flying Corps, who were understandably upset at their portrayal, including Wellman, who insisted that his producer's credit be removed. So, what would have been Eastwood's first leading role saw his part reduced. Flat acting aspects were roundly panned by critics. Also in 1958, Eastwood appeared in Ambush at Cimarron Pass, a mediocre western which consists of the survivors of a squad of cavalry led by Sergeant Blake, who are escorting a prisoner, Corbin, back to their fort. They encounter the survivors of a Texas cattle drive, all former Confederate soldiers led by Sam Prescott, who include the young Keith Williams, played by Eastwood, who still hates Northerners and has to be restrained from shooting Blake. Eastwood himself dissed this movie by saying it was probably the lousiest western ever made. John Wayne only had one release in 1958, The Barbarian and the Geisha, an American adventure film directed by John Huston. In 1856, Townsend Harris, played by John Wayne, is sent by President Franklin Pierce to serve as the first U.S. Consul General to Japan, following the treaty written by Commodore Matthew Perry 2 years before. Accompanied only by his translator secretary, Huskin, and 3 Chinese servants, Harris comes ashore at the town of Shimoda Prefecture, as specified in the treaty as the location for an American consulate. The film was heavily re-edited by 20th Century Fox before release. Director John Huston denounced this version and even wanted to have his name removed from the credits. The film is based on American diplomat Townsend Harris and his time in Japan during the final years of the Tokugawa shogunate. The film underperformed at the box office and met with mixed reviews. Neither Eastwood or Wayne did well in 1958.
Get 3 coffins ready.
Huh?
What made you think I wouldn't kill you? Curiosity.
Clint Eastwood took some time off from acting in theatrical releases following the disappointing films released in 1958. He was also busy with the TV series Rawhide from 1959 till 1965. We next see him on the big screen in his first spaghetti western, 1964's A Fistful of Dollars. This movie was a surprise hit and established Eastwood as a major star. The film spawned 2 sequels, which we'll discuss later. The film has been identified as an unofficial remake of the Akira Kurosawa film, Yojimbo, which resulted in a successful lawsuit by Toho. An unnamed stranger, Eastwood, arrives at the little town of San Miguel, on the Mexico-United States border. Silvanito, the town's innkeeper, tells the stranger about a feud between 2 smuggler families vying to gain control of the town, the Rojo brothers, and the family comprising the town sheriff John Baxter, his matriarchal wife Consuelo, and their son Antonio. The stranger, in order to make money, decides to play these families against each other. He demonstrates his speed and accuracy with his gun, to both sides, by shooting with ease 4 men, including the 3 who insulted him as he entered the town. The film made almost $20 million worldwide on a budget of $200,000. John Wayne's.
I've made a lot of westerns in my time, but never one like The War Wagon.
His sole entry in 1967 was The War Wagon, one of 3 films which also featured Kirk Douglas. Former rancher Todd Jackson, played by Wayne, returns to his hometown to settle a score with corrupt businessman Frank Pierce. 3 years earlier, Pierce had Jackson wrongfully imprisoned and appropriated his land, including his house and some recently discovered gold deposits. The War Wagon was met with generally positive reviews from critics and holds a 90% fresh score on Rotten Tomatoes. The film debuted in first place at the domestic box office. It grossed $9,563,000 in total, making it a success. Both actors scored big in 1967. Eastwood's star was rising, as Wayne's was still going strong.
Take it back. Take it to the station. Go inside. The station.
John Wayne had no other films released in 1967. Clint Eastwood had the other 2 in the so-called Dollars Trilogy released that year. For a few dollars more, a 1965 spaghetti western film directed by Sergio Leone. It stars Clint Eastwood and Lee Van Cleef as bounty hunters. The man that many call Manco is a bounty hunter, a profession shared by a former Army officer, Colonel Douglas Mortimer. They separately learned that a ruthless, cold-blooded bank robber, El Indio, has been broken out of prison by his gang, who slaughtered all but one of his jailers. The film proved to be even more commercially successful than its predecessor. It grossed a total of $15 million in the United States and Canada, adding up to a total of $25.5 million grossed worldwide. The final film in the trilogy, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, came out a few months later, starring Clint Eastwood as the good, Lee Van Cleef as the bad, and Eli Wallach as the ugly. In 1862, in the American Southwest during the Civil War, 3 bounty hunters attack Mexican bandit Tuco Ramirez, who shoots all 3 of them. Elsewhere, a mercenary known as Angel Eyes interrogates former Confederate soldier Stevens, who he has been hired to kill. In Italy, the film grossed $6.3 million at the time. In the United States and Canada, the film grossed $25.1 million. It also grossed $7.5 million in other international territories, for a total of $38.9 million grossed worldwide.
All right, saddle up those horses and nothing foolish.
You very kind, Marshal. Would you be my friend, too?
Forget about it.
I think Pup broke their back. We can probably move in there tomorrow. Good. God willing, and the river don't rise.
After his successful spaghetti westerns, or films shot in Italy, Eastwood returned to Hollywood a major superstar and churned out 3 films in 1968. The first was Hang 'Em High. It stars Clint Eastwood as Jed Cooper, an innocent man who survives a lynching, Inger Stevens as a widow who helps him, Ed Begley as the leader of the gang that lynched Cooper, and Pat Hingle as the federal judge who hires him as a deputy U.S. Marshal. Hang 'Em High was the first production of the Malpaso Company, Eastwood's production company. It became the biggest United Artists opening in history, exceeding all of the James Bond films at that time. On a budget of $1.6 million, earning over $3 million. The script of the film inspired the McCloud television series that starred Dennis Weaver. After That Is Where Eagles Dare is a 1968 British-American war film directed by Brian G. Hutton and starring Richard Burton, Clint Eastwood, and Mary Ure. It follows a joint British-American Special Operations executive team of paratroopers raiding a castle. This was another huge success for Eastwood, as the film made over $21 million at the box office with generally positive reviews. John Wayne released 2 films in 1968. The first was The Green Berets, a 1968 American war film directed by John Wayne and Ray Kellogg and starring John Wayne, David Janssen, and Jim Hutton, based on the 1965 novel by Robin Moore. The Green Berets is strongly anti-communist and pro-South Vietnam. It was released at the height of American involvement in the Vietnam War, the same year as the Tet Offensive against the largest cities in South Vietnam. John Wayne was so concerned by the anti-war sentiment in the United States, he wanted to make this film to present the pro-military position. The plot sees reporter George Beckworth attends a Special Forces briefing about the reasons for American military involvement in the Vietnam War. When Beckworth doubts the value of U.S. intervention, Green Beret Colonel Mike Kirby, played by John Wayne, asks him if he has ever been to Vietnam, which influences him to report on events there. Despite poor reviews, and despite being protested and picketed in the United States and abroad, it went on to be a commercial success, which Wayne attributed in part to the negative reviews from the press, which he saw as representing criticism of the war rather than the film. "The critics overkilled me, the picture and the war," said Wayne. As a result, so many people went to see it that I had a check from the distributors for $8 million within 3 months. That's the cost of the picture, so we moved into profit the next day. The Green Berets earned rentals of $8.7 million in North America during 1968. After that came Hell Fighters, a 1968 American adventure film directed by Andrew V. McLaglen and starring John Wayne, Catherine Ross, Jim Hutton, and Vera Miles. The movie depicts a group of oil well firefighters and is based loosely on the life of Red Adair. Adair, Boots Hansen, and Coots Matthews served as technical advisors on the film. Hellfighters made a little over $3 million and was panned by critics. Eastwood succeeded with critics and at the box office, while Wayne films of 1968 were panned and were a mixed financial success.
What did you get?
Something very close, exactly along those lines. A Clint Eastwood, Lee Marvin shoot-'em-up western.
Why did you come clear out here to continue a war that ended months ago in Virginia?
Because I'm a stubborn man.
Clint Eastwood's loan offering in 1969 was Paint Your Wagon, an American Western musical film starring Lee Marvin, Clint Eastwood, and Gene Seberg. The film was adapted by Paddy Chayefsky from the 1951 musical Paint Your Wagon by Lerner and Lowe. It is set in a mining camp in Gold Rush-era California. When a wagon crashes into a ravine, prospector Ben Rumson finds 2 adult male occupants, brothers, one of whom is dead and the other of whom has a broken arm and leg. While burying the dead man, gold dust is discovered at the gravesite. Ben stakes a claim on the land and adopts the surviving brother as his partner while he recuperates. The film was panned by critics, garnering 33% on Rotten Tomatoes. However, it was hugely successful at the box office, making $31.6 million on a $20 million budget. John Wayne's offerings in 1969 brought us his Oscar Award-winning True Grit, his first outing as Rooster Cogburn. It also starred Glenn Campbell as LaBeouf and Kim Darby as Mattie Ross. It is the first film adaptation of Charles Portis' 1968 novel of the same name. The plot sees Frank Ross, of Yell County, Arkansas, murdered and robbed by his hired hand, Tom Chaney. Ross's young daughter, Mattie, travels to Fort Smith, where she hires aging U.S. Marshal Reuben Rooster J. Cogburn to apprehend Chaney. This film was hugely successful, both with critics and at the box office, matching Paint Your Wagon's take of $31 million. He also gave us The Undefeated that year, a 1969 American Western and Civil War-era film directed by Andrew V. McLaglen and starring John Wayne and Rock Hudson. In the closing days of the American Civil War, Union Army Colonel John Henry Thomas and Company organized one final attack on a small unit of Confederate soldiers, only to be informed after bloodily defeating them that the war had ended 3 days ago. This film failed at the box office, garnering less than $5 million. It needed more to break even. A mixed bag for Wayne that year.
So prepare yourself for the bloody mayhem and unholy carnage of Joshua Logan's Paint Your Wagon.
With blood, I bet.
The least you can do is take off your hat.
I haven't got time for that.
Hold your fire, you fool!
Don't you come no closer!
I'll go. He won't shoot a woman.
Don't count on it.
1970 saw 2 Clint Eastwood vehicles. The first was Two Mules for Sister Sarah, an American-Mexican Western film in Panavision directed by Don Siegel and starring Shirley MacLaine and Clint Eastwood, set during the French intervention in Mexico. A former soldier named Hogan, Clint Eastwood, rides up on a naked woman about to be assaulted by bandits. He kills the bandits and discovers the woman is a nun, Sister Sarah, Shirley MacLaine, who is raising money to assist Mexican revolutionaries. Two Mules for Sister Sarah received moderately favorable reviews and was a modest hit, garnering almost $5 million on a $2.5 million budget. He also gave us Kelly's Heroes that year, a World War II comedy-drama heist film, directed by Brian G. Hutton, about a motley crew of American GIs who go AWOL in order to rob a French bank, located behind German lines, of its stored Nazi gold bars. The film stars Clint Eastwood and Telly Savalas, and co-stars Don Rickles, Carol O'Connor, and Donald Sutherland, providing the comic absurdity, with secondary, comedic roles by Harry Dean Stanton, Gavin MacLeod, Carlotto Alberti, also Stuart Margolin. The film received mostly positive reviews. The film earned $5.2 million in U.S. theatrical rentals. Film review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes gave the film an approval rating of 78% based on 23 reviews. The website's critical consensus reads, Kelly's Heroes subverts its World War II setting with pointed satirical commentary on modern military efforts, offering an entertaining hybrid of heist caper and battlefield action. In 1970, John Wayne narrated 2 documentaries, No Substitute for Victory, and Harry Jackson, A Man and His Art. He also gave 2 important films. In Chisholm, a kindly and successful cattle baron finds his peace threatened when immoral Lawrence Murphy and his business partner James Dolan forcibly buy up most of the land and businesses in the area. Initially, Chisholm tries to not get involved. Chisholm is another attempt to tell the story of Billy the Kid and is based on the Lincoln County War of 1878 and, although it changed a number of details, many of the historical figures in the film were in the New Mexico Territory at the time and did play a part in the conflict. It grossed $6 million at the American box office on a $4 million budget. Then came Rio Lobo, an American Western film directed and produced by Howard Hawks. During the American Civil War, a secret Union Army payroll train is raided by Confederates. Union Colonel Cord McNally loses his close friend, Lieutenant Ned Forsyth, in the raid, and the complexity of the Confederate scheme indicates that Union traders must have provided them with the details about the transport. The film made $4.25 million in rentals, 20th among the highest money-making pictures of the year, but it grossed $2 million less than its $6 million budget, making it a box office bomb. It also garnered negative reviews at the time, but modern reviewers have been kinder. So Wayne and Eastwood's box office was about the same take in 1970, but the critics were kinder to Eastwood.
You've got to ask yourself one question. Do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk?
No, sir. No, sir, I ain't. Haven't butted into anybody's business since I was 18-year-old.
Eastwood gave us 3 offerings in 1971. Civil War in 1863, Amy, a 12-year-old student at the Miss Martha Farnsworth Seminary for Young Lady, an American psychological thriller film directed by and starring Clint Eastwood, his directorial debut. Jessica Walter and Donna Mills co-star. Dave Garver is a KRML radio disc jockey who broadcasts nightly from a studio in Carmel-by-the-Sea, California, often incorporating poetry into his program. After work at his favorite bar, playing a nonsensical game involving corks and bottle caps with the barman as a device, he deliberately attracts the attention of a woman named Evelyn Draper. Dave drives her home, where she reveals that her presence in the bar was not accidental. It was she in fact who sought him out after hearing the bar mentioned on his radio show. He guesses correctly that she is the recurring caller who always requests the jazz standard Misty. The two have relations. The film has been given mostly positive reviews, with an 85% rating on Rotten Tomatoes and a modest success, bringing over $10 million. This was much needed after The Beguiled. Also that year, John Wayne only gave us 1 offering in 1971, Big Jake, American Technicolor Western film starring John Wayne, Richard Boone, and Maureen O'Hara. The picture was the final film for George Sherman in a directing career of more than 30 years, and Maureen O'Hara's last film with John Wayne and her last before her 20-year retirement. In 1909, near the Mexico-United States border, Martha McCandles runs a massive ranch with the help of her sons Jeff, Michael, and James. The Fane gang attacks the ranch, slaying many members of the staff. Jacob Little Jake is kidnapped before the gang flees to Mexico, leaving behind a ransom note for $1 million. The film had mixed reviews but was a modest success, reaching $7.5 million at the box office. Eastwood was the clear winner in 1971 with Dirty Harry.
Straight up or draped over the saddle, either one.
Did you ever think of hiring boys?
What boys?
School boys.
Oh, sure, and women. How about my mama in Cedar City?
Clint Eastwood starred in 1 film in 1972, Joe Kidd, an American Western film starring Clint Eastwood and Robert Duvall. In the town of Sonora, New Mexico in the early 1900s, Joe Kidd, a disaffected former bounty hunter, is in jail for hunting on Indian land and disturbing the peace. Mexican bandito revolutionary Luis Chama has organized a peasant revolt against the local landowners who are throwing the poor off their ancestral lands. The film received a mixed reception from critics but was a modest success, making about $6 million at the box office. John Wayne did a bit better with his 1972 offering, The Cowboys, American Western film starring John Wayne, Roscoe Lee Brown, and Bruce Dern, and featuring Colleen Dewhurst and Slim Pickens. When his ranch hands abandon him to join a gold rush, aging rancher Will Anderson is forced to find replacement drovers for his upcoming cattle drive. He rides into deserted Bozeman, Montana, where his friend Nance Peterson suggests hiring local schoolboys. Anderson visits the school, but departs, skeptical that such immature boys could handle the job. On Rotten Tomatoes, it has an approval rating of 80% and made over $19 million on a $6 million budget. There was also a brief 13-episode television series based on the film.
did you say your name was again?
I didn't.
You unload that mule. Bury the dynamite. Bury it? You wouldn't want to get blown to hell for a stray bullet, would you? No, sir.
Clint Eastwood gave us two films in 1973. First came High Plains Drifter, American Western film also directed by Clint Eastwood. A mysterious, unnamed stranger rides out of the desert into the isolated mining town of Lago in the American Old West. Three gunmen hired to protect the town taunt and threaten him. He kills all three with little effort. The stranger dreams of Jim Duncan, AUOS, Marshall, being whipped to death by outlaws Stacy Bridges and brothers Dan and Cole Carlin, as Lago's citizens watch in silence. Universal released the R-rated High Plains Drifter in the United States in April 1973, and the film eventually grossed $15.7 million domestically, ultimately making it the sixth highest grossing Western in North America in the decade of the 1970s. It was also well received by critics with a 94% approval on Rotten Tomatoes. Also, Dirty Harry came back in 1973 with Magnum Force. In 1972, after being acquitted of a mass murder on a legal technicality, mobster Carmine Rickard drives away from court in his limousine. While traveling on a city road, the driver is pulled over by a San Francisco Police Department motorcycle cop, who calmly guns down every man in the car. Inspector Harry Callahan visits the crime scene with his new partner, Ullington Early Smith, despite the fact that the two are supposed to be on stakeout duty. The worldwide box office gross for Magnum Force was around $30 million, making it more successful than the first film. It got 70% approval on Rotten Tomatoes. John Wayne also gave us two films in 1973. The first being The Train Robbers, an American Western film written and directed by Burt Kennedy and starring John Wayne, Ann-Margret, Rod Taylor, Ben Johnson, and Ricardo Montalban. After the death of her husband, Mrs. Lowe wants to tell the railroad where to find $500,000 in gold her late husband Matt stole during a train robbery, and she wants to clear the family name for her son. Instead, Lane convinces her to retrieve the gold so she can collect the $50,000 reward offered by the railroad for its return. This film garnered mixed reviews and about $2.5 million at the box office. Then came Cahill U.S. Marshall, an American Western film starring Wayne as a driven lawman in a black hat. While Jade D. Cahill, a widower and U.S. Marshal, is away from home, his two sons Danny and Billy aid Abe Fraser and his gang to escape from jail and to rob a bank. The town's sheriff is shot and killed during the robbery. Billy hides the stolen money while his brother and the rest of the gang return to locked jail cells as an alibi. Another Western with mixed reviews and about a $3 million box office. The popularity of Westerns was waning in the early 70s as thrillers and science fiction films began to rise in popularity. The Planet of the Apes movies would lead the way, and by 1977, Star Wars had taken the box office by storm and very few Westerns would be released after 1975.
Glory to God in the highest, and on earth, peace and goodwill towards men. Amen.
You're not going to take it, are you?
Just say it's a loan.
Lon? It's not licensed.
Jack, neither am I.
Now we come to 1974. Clint Eastwood gives us one offering, Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, which is an American crime comedy film written and directed by Michael Cimino and starring Clint Eastwood, Jeff Bridges, and George Kennedy. The plot sees a young ne'er-do-well, Lightfoot, stealing a car. Elsewhere, an assassin attempts to shoot a preacher who is delivering a sermon at his pulpit. The preacher escapes on foot. Lightfoot, who happens to be driving by, inadvertently rescues the preacher by running over his pursuer and giving the preacher a lift. They steal a series of cars, patronizing prostitutes, and escape another attempt on their lives by two men. It grossed $25 million in the United States, making it successful on its $4 million budget, but Clint Eastwood vowed never to work with the movie's distributor United Artists again due to what he felt was bad promotion. John Wayne also gave us one film that year with McHugh, which is a 1974 American Panavision neo-noir crime action film directed by John Sturges. It co-stars Eddie Albert and Diana Muldaur. Before dawn in Seattle, a man drives into town and shoots a policeman and another in a parking lot. The gunman leaves his car at a dealership and enters a luncheonette, where, now seen to be wearing a police badge, he is greeted as Sarge. A car pulls up, and the gunman goes outside. He gives the driver a satchel containing his gun and begins to walk away, but the driver shoots him in the back with a shotgun. After his last couple of westerns tanked at the box office, and seeing Clint Eastwood's success with Dirty Harry, which he turned down, John Wayne tried his own hand at police thrillers, which brought us this effort. The film garnered mixed reviews and only brought in about $4 million at the box office. John Wayne was in desperate need of a hit at this stage of his career.
A delivery. I have this box of dental floss for Dr. Millar, but he doesn't answer his door.
He's off today.
What'll I do with this box of floss?
To whom do you think you are talking, Marshal?
You is to whom I think I'm talking, sister.
Clint is back with one film in 1975, The Eiger Sanction, which is an American action film directed by and starring Clint Eastwood. Based on the 1972 novel The Eiger Sanction by Trevanian, the film is about Jonathan Hemlock, an art history professor, mountain climber, and former assassin once employed by a secret government agency who was blackmailed into returning to his deadly profession for one last mission. The Eiger Sanction received mixed reviews upon its theatrical release. The general reaction among many reviewers offered criticism for the story and screenplay, and praise for the climbing footage and action sequences. Variety concluded, Eastwood manages fine suspense both in the Swiss and Monument Valley climbs, as well as delineation of character. The film made about $14 million on a $9 million budget, making it a mild success. John Wayne also did one film in 1975. Brannigan is another attempt by Wayne to produce a highly successful police thriller. Tough Chicago Police Lieutenant Jim Brannigan is sent to London to extradite a notorious American gangster, Ben Larkin. Brannigan is assigned a local officer, Jennifer, to help while he is in London. But before Brannigan can collect his man, Larkin is kidnapped. This film once again brought mixed reviews, with many praising Wayne but not the story. This one did a little bit better than Nick Q, with just under $5 million at the box office. John Wayne would single-handedly bring back the Western in 1975 with Rooster Cogburn, a sequel to True Grit. Wayne appears with Katharine Hepburn in this final outing as Rooster Cogburn. In Fort Smith, Arkansas, in the late 19th century, aging 1 IGOS, Marshal Rooster Cogburn is stripped of his badge by Judge Parker due to his drunkenness and questionable use of firearms. When a shipment of highly explosive nitroglycerin is stolen from a transporting troop of United States Army cavalry by the ruthless bank robber Hawk and his gang of 9 other outlaws, Cogburn is given a chance to redeem himself. Although the critics were mixed, the box office was a return to form for Wayne with a respectable $18 million on a $7 million budget. The Western was back. Albeit briefly, Clint Eastwood would also give us one more successful Western before the genre would lie dormant for 9 years, with the release of Pale Rider in 1985.
I'm Josie Wales.
I have heard. You're the Grey Rider.
Got nowhere to go.
And you will die.
I came here to die with you. Or live with you.
Just throw me your wallet. Yes, sir. A little something extra.
Clint Eastwood tried his hand at another Western in 1976 with The Outlaw Josie Wales, one of the few successful Westerns left in the 70s. It's an American revisionist Western film set during and after the American Civil War. It was also directed by Eastwood. Josie Wales, a Missouri farmer, is driven to revenge by the murder of his wife and young son by a band of Redlegs, a unit of pro-Union Jayhawker militants from Senator James H. Lane's Kansas Brigade, led by the brutal Captain Terrell. Upon release in August 1976, The Outlaw Josie Wales was widely acclaimed by critics, many of whom saw Eastwood's role as an iconic one, relating it with much of America's ancestral past and the destiny of the nation after the American Civil War. It would also gross almost $32 million on a budget of about $4 million. Eastwood also came back as Dirty Harry in the third film of that franchise in The Enforcer. It also starred Tyne Daly as Inspector Kate Moore, and DeVaron Bookwalter as criminal mastermind Bobby Maxwell. It was also the last film in the series to feature John Mitchum as Inspector Frank DiGiorgio. In Marin County, 2 gas company men are lured by a scantily clad woman to a remote spot in Mill Valley, where both are killed by Bobby Maxwell. Maxwell leads a group of men and women calling themselves the People's Revolutionary Strike Force, who pose as a terrorist organization to conceal the true purpose of their criminal activities. Another success. Though not as successful with the critics as the previous installments, it made over $46 million on a $9 million budget, making it more successful than the previous films. John Wayne's last film, also a Western, came out in 1976. It was called The Shootist, directed by Don Siegel and based on Glendon Swarthout's 1975 novel. The supporting cast includes Lauren Bacall, Ron Howard, James Stewart, Richard Boone, Hugh O'Brien, Harry Morgan, John Carradine, Sherry North, Scatman Crothers, and Rick Lenz. Throughout his life, sheriff-turned-gunfighter John Bernard J.B. Brooks has committed 30-plus killings. Now an older man, Brooks arrives in Carson City, Nevada, in late January 1901. Soon, he is confronted by an armed robber, who he quickly disarms by wounding him. He later has another confrontation with dairyman Jay Cobb. However, Cobb's assistant, Gillum Rogers, verbally defuses the situation. Brooks then visits Dr. E.W. Doc Hostetler, a physician who treated his gunshot wounds 15 years before. Wayne was not initially considered for the role due to the health and stamina issues he had experienced during filming of his penultimate film, Rooster Cogburn. Paul Newman passed on the role, as did George C. Scott, Charles Bronson, Gene Hackman, and Clint Eastwood, before it was finally offered to Wayne. Although his compromised lung capacity made breathing and mobility difficult at Carson City's altitude, and production had to be shut down for a week while he recovered from influenza, Wayne completed the filming without further significant medical issues. It was named one of the 10 best films of 1976 by the National Board of Review. Film critic Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times ranked The Shootist number 10 on his list of the 10 best films of 1976. The film was nominated for an Oscar, a Golden Globe, a BAFTA Film Award, and a Writers Guild of America Award. The film has an 83% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, based on 24 reviews. The film was nominated by the American Film Institute as one of the best Western films in 2008. Quentin Tarantino later wrote, "There's nothing in The Shootist you haven't seen done many times before and done better. But what you haven't seen before is a dying John Wayne give his last performance. And it's Wayne's performance, and the performances of some of the surrounding characters that make The Shootist not the classic it wants to be, but memorable nonetheless. A fine swan song for an actor that gave us some of the greatest films in American cinema history." Thank you for joining me. In a way, it wasn't fair to compare these two icons' film careers in the years they both released movies, since Wayne's best work had already been released and Clint was an up-and-coming star. The bulk of both men's work came out at different times. John Wayne's peak had already happened and Eastwood's hadn't yet. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. Were you a fan of John Wayne or Clint Eastwood? Did you like both equally? Let me know. Also, subscribe to my channel, and check out my Carl Vincent Vampire Hunter franchise in the comments below. Until next time, this is Andrew in for Kevin Given saying live long and prosper, may the force be with you, and keep reaching for the stars.